Careful, soldier. Scars like that tell stories you wouldn't survive. The words cut through the chatter of the crowded diner like a sharp blade through silence. The young soldiers at the corner table laughed, their uniforms still crisp from training, unaware of the sting their words carried. The waitress's hand trembled as she set down their coffee cups, but she said nothing. She'd heard worse. And yet, across the table, one man's eyes didn't join in the laughter. It was a small-town diner just off the military base, the kind that smelled of strong coffee, fried eggs, and old stories. Wooden beams framed the room. Sunlight spilled lazily across worn tables, and the air hummed with the low rumble of soldiers talking about everything except what haunted them. The waitress, her name tag read Maya, moved quietly from table to table. Her black vest was neat, her hair tied tight, but her sleeves rolled up just enough to show faint, linear scars across her forearm. They weren't fresh, but they were visible, like pale threads of fire etched into her skin. At table 7 sat 4 young men, their laughter loud and careless. They were proud, untarnished, and too young to understand the weight that comes with real battle. "Hey, miss," one of them, Private Collins, said with a smirk, pointing with his fork. "What happened there? Lose a fight with a toaster?" His buddies snickered, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Maya froze for a heartbeat, her eyes calm but distant. Then she smiled faintly, setting down their mugs. "Something like that, sir," she said softly and walked away. At that same table sat a man who did not laugh. Colonel Hayes, silver-haired and stoic, stirred his coffee slowly, watching the waitress walk away. His eyes, the kind that had seen too many battlefields and buried too many names, followed her every movement. He could read pain even when it hid behind a polite smile. "You boys ever heard of respect?" he asked quietly, setting his mug down. The laughter stopped instantly. "Sir, we didn't mean—" one started, but Hayes raised a hand. "No, you didn't mean to. That's the problem. You don't mean anything yet." His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of command. The soldiers lowered their eyes, unsure how to respond. Maya disappeared into the kitchen, pretending not to hear. This wasn't the first time someone mocked her scars. Some people assumed drugs. Others thought she wanted pity. None of them knew the truth, and she had stopped explaining long ago. The other waitresses glanced at her with quiet sympathy, but she simply refilled her tray and stepped back out. Life, she had learned, didn't stop for cruel words. When she returned with the check, Colonel Hayes looked up at her, his gaze sharp with recognition. "Miss," he said gently, "forgive me for asking. That mark on your arm, is that?" Maya paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "You recognize it?" she asked, voice steady but guarded. Hayes nodded slowly. "IED burn pattern, wrist to elbow. Same kind of blast that hit Bravo Company 2012. We lost half our convoy that day." The young soldiers froze, their laughter dying instantly. Maya set the check down carefully. "Yeah," she said after a moment. "Kandahar. I was with the med unit. 2 weeks before discharge, our convoy got hit. I pulled 3 soldiers out before the truck exploded." Her voice trembled, not from fear but from the ghosts that memory awakened. "One of them didn't make it. The others, they lived. The scars stayed." The diner grew still. Even the hum of casual chatter faded into silence. Hayes leaned forward, his expression softening with understanding. "You were there," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. She nodded. "We all were," she murmured. "Just some of us came home with more visible reminders." Then, without warning, Hayes stood up. "On your feet," he said to the young soldiers. They hesitated, confused. His tone hardened. "Now." The men rose instantly, instinctively straightening their backs. The room turned to look. Hayes looked at Maya, his voice deep and unwavering. "On behalf of these soldiers, and every one of us who ever forgot what courage looks like, thank you." He saluted. Maya's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. She hadn't been saluted since she'd left the service years ago, when doctors told her she'd done enough. The young soldiers followed Hayes's lead, standing at attention, their earlier arrogance washed away by shame and respect. Collins, the one who mocked her, swallowed hard and said quietly, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Maya smiled softly, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "Most people don't," she whispered. "They just see the scars." Hayes stepped closer, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Scars don't mean you're broken," he said. "They mean you survived something that tried to break you." For a moment, no one spoke. The golden afternoon light spilled across the diner, illuminating Maya's face. She looked down at her arm, at the scars that had once made her feel small, and saw them differently now, not as shame, but as proof. When the soldiers left, they did so quietly. Collins lingered just long enough to slip an envelope under his coffee cup. Inside was a note, "For your service, for our ignorance," and beneath it, 5 crisp $100 bills. Hayes stayed behind for one more cup of coffee. "You could have stayed in," he said gently. Maya smiled faintly. "I tried, but after the blast, everything changed. Couldn't sleep, couldn't walk straight for months. The army said I'd done my part. Maybe they were right." Hayes looked at her with the kind of pride that words couldn't hold. "You saved lives, Maya. That's more than most of us can say." She nodded, her smile small but real. "Maybe, but I like it here. People come and go. And sometimes," she added, glancing at the empty table where the soldiers had sat, "they learn something before they leave." Hayes chuckled softly, stood up, and extended his hand. "Keep that scar visible," he said. "It's not something to hide. It's your medal." Maya shook his hand, eyes glistening. As he walked out, she looked down at her arm again. For the first time in years, she didn't pull her sleeve down. That afternoon, the diner filled again with chatter, laughter, and the smell of coffee. But something felt different. Maya moved with lighter steps, her scars catching the sunlight as she poured another cup. They no longer felt like reminders of pain, they felt like proof of strength. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought in silence, behind smiles, in small-town diners where heroes wear aprons instead of uniforms. And sometimes, all it takes is one person, one veteran's words, to remind the world that the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Because heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes, they wear aprons.